A reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Moses spoke to the people, saying, "The priest shall receive the basket from you, and shall set it in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Then you shall declare before the Lord your God, 'My father was a wandering Aramean, who went down to Egypt with a small household and lived there as an alien. But there he became a nation, great, strong, and numerous. When the Egyptians maltreated and oppressed us, imposing hard labor upon us, we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and he heard our cry and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. He brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and outstretched arm, with terrifying power, with signs and wonders. In bringing us into this country, he gave us this land flowing with milk and honey. Therefore, I have now brought you the first fruits of the products of the soil, which you, O Lord, have given me. And having set them before the Lord your God, you shall bow down in his presence." The word of the Lord. I don't know if many of you have experienced sailing, but even if you don't, you can imagine taking a long journey across the sea. There will be times when the wind is calm, the sun is shining, and your little wooden boat seems to glide along smoothly. And there will be times when a storm hits, when the wind is tearing through the air, when you're overwhelmed by the crashing waves, and you feel as if the wooden planks are about to burst from beneath your feet. In the midst of these storms, you might begin to wonder why it is you ever got on this boat. You might wonder if it is really worth pressing on, if your destination is really worth all this suffering. These are questions I imagine the Israelites must have asked themselves many times through the journey in the desert. We read how they were oppressed in Egypt. We know how they wandered in the desert for 40 years, and how, even when they finally got to the Promised Land, they were constantly at war. The Christian journey can be easily compared to sailing or the story of the Israelites, for we too are on the way. And throughout our lives, there will be storms that challenge us severely. Now we can read in this passage from Deuteronomy 3 lessons that might help us to navigate these storms. First, we note how Moses is instructing his people on what they are to do when they finally arrive at the Promised Land. This means they are not yet there, but still wandering through the desert. Moses instructs his people to look ahead, to remember what it is they are pursuing, that God has called them to himself, and through Abraham, he has promised to give them a land of their own. In faith, Moses anticipates God's fidelity by instructing them to give thanks when they have arrived. Likewise, Moses instructs them to look back, to remember the ways God has delivered them in the past, and to take confidence that he will do so again. Let us then be mindful of where we are striving to go, that is, heaven, and let us recall the great things God has done to bring us this far already. Second, and this is especially important during Lent, we see that we are to purge the excess water that we have taken on, water that is slowing us down and maybe even threatening to capsize our boat. Moses instructs the Israelites that even after 40 years of wandering in the desert, they are still to give an offering of the first fruits from the land. Maybe he recognizes the human tendency to grow complacent when comfortable, that we stop striving for our heavenly homeland when our earthly home supplies all our needs. Let us keep this in mind during Lent. If we have grown attached to bodily comforts, let us make uncomfortable sacrifices. If we have grown attached to our unneeded books or clothes, let us give some away. And if we have grown attached to our schedule, let us carve out more time for prayer. The third lesson we can draw from this passage is that we are to draw close to Christ. We read how, when in Egypt, the Israelites cried to the Lord, he heard their cry, and he brought them out of Egypt. Just so, Christ must be our support in the midst of the storms and trials we will face. He goes before us, leading the way and setting an example. He follows behind us, ready to catch us when we fall. And he walks beside us, strengthening us on our way. This Lent, let us call to mind where we have come from and where we are going. Let us purge ourselves of all that slows us down, and let us draw ever more closely to Christ, our Savior.
Virgo Maria.